Curacao has a hot new vibe and is now the place to be. An explosion of art, architecture, and restaurants has spurred redevelopment, transforming Curacao into one of the hippest destinations in the Caribbean. But the island still radiates its European charm, natural beauty, and wonderful mix of Dutch, Spanish, Caribbean, and African cultures. Visitors must go and feel it for themselves. Located on the outer fringes of the hurricane belt, Curacao is easy to reach by nonstop flights from 6 North American gateways and by same-day service from 40 cities in the USA and Canada. Still a member of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, daily nonstop flights arrive from Amsterdam, and many flights arrive from South American and Caribbean locations. English is spoken widely, along with Dutch, Spanish, and Papiamentu, the local language. Curaçao's dry, sunny climate and an average temperature of 87 degrees Fahrenheit make it a mecca for every variety of outdoor activities. Visitors won't have to change money. While the official currency is the Netherlands Antillean Guilder, or NAF, US dollars are widely accepted. And the water is safe to drink, straight from a modern desalination plant. Want to know more? Watch our other videos to learn all the things you need to know for planning personalized dream vacations. You'll see where to stay, lounge, dine, and party. You'll get tips on the hottest areas like the Peter Mai district, the best beaches, where to access shore and ocean dives, and all kinds of land and water-based activities, some that are unique to Curacao. So, welcome to Curacao and its hot new vibe. Visitors must go and feel it for themselves.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As we say in Papiamento, bon dia, bon tardi, bon noche. To all global participants, but also everyone tuning in here from Curacao. My name is Joanda Costa Gomez, and I welcome you to today's session. As known, these sessions are part of the 21st International Conference on Diversity in Organizations, Communities, and Nations. The University of Curacao is hosting these sessions regarding the impact of COVID-19 on a society, in this case on the Curacao society, but also in a broad spectrum that is useful, I think, and the whole organization thinks, for the community as a whole. It is very important to realize that this year's theme is education. The part of education has a role in it. The theme is economic resilience and sustainable development, which is, of course, very important in this time of crisis in which we are living. Today's session is educational impact discussion. So we're going to have two speakers who will address the impact that COVID has had on the educational system, and hopefully from these discussions that can come out after the presentations, we can also create a view of as to how we can go into the future, into bettering our educational system. So very important. I welcome you all to this session. I want to remind everybody that you can send your questions in the chat box. The chat box, we do not encourage chatting in the chat box, and just post your questions. We will ask them at the end of both presentations. But you can also use the WhatsApp number, which will be shown in the screen. And you can send your WhatsApp questions. I will look at them and then post the questions to the speakers when the presentations are done. Without further ado, let's dive right into it. Our first speaker for today is Vladimir Kleinmoedig, Dr. Anders Vladimir Kleinmoedig. He's a representative of the Ministry of Education. The title of his presentation is A Global Disruption as an Educational Development Accelerator on Curacao, keeping the eyes on the prize of a good educational system and opportunity for all. And it is important to realize when you have a speaker, why it is this person that is the one that is able to provide valuable insights and information regarding this topic. And when we talk about Vladimir Kleinmoedig, we have to realize that this is a person that for over 2 decades has known this educational system, not only in Curacao, but also in Holland from bottom up. He began working as a teacher in high secondary, as well as in secondary education, as well as higher education. He has a background in economics, in educational management, and as an educational specialist. He has worked as a principal, superintendent of superintendent of public schools. He is now the director of the Department of Education here in Curacao at the Ministry of Education, and he has been working for 16 years in the public sector. So as previously stated, it's someone that really knows the educational system, so he will be able to provide very valuable insights as to the global disruption and how this situation has impacted education here in Curacao. I give the floor to Vladimir Kleimoedig.
Thank you, Joan. Good morning. It's my pleasure to be able to share with you. And I'm so glad I'll be able to share this presentation later on with Dr. Odette. And I'm convinced that our information will cross over and empower all of us who are listening and want to contribute to a better education system. I woke up this morning and wrote a whole new chapter I want to share with you. I wrote it down just to be brief. So it's a brief introduction on the topic, Global Disruption as an Educational Development Accelerator on Curacao, because I called it Development Accelerator because it accelerated a lot of positive developments here on the island. And I will be elaborating on them further on. On behalf of the Ministry of Education, I would like to thank the University of Curacao for this opportunity. The pandemic made us all go through some punchy times, really. And we are recovering, thank God. And so we're positive about it, and I will be sharing more about that later. I want to take, first of all, the opportunity to show some love and appreciation to all teachers who did an awesome job during the lockdowns. Your love and care for our students made them return happily to school. I also want to recognize special efforts made by principals, working long hours, and also taking the role of policemen. That might sound funny, but during the lockdowns, you would think that schools would not be accessible. But guess what? Not all intruders were locked down. So there were some burglaries. They had to attempt to the school to protect the building, especially from further looting. So big thanks to the principals, the school boards, the institutions of all levels of education. Thanks for caring for our exceptional and for doing exceptional efforts. Really appreciate it. Last but not least, the parents. Well, on behalf of the education sector, I can share some very awkward but also funny experiences of scenes during lockdowns, virtual classes, what we saw and heard. It was funny. It was funny to notice that everybody made an effort to make education and continual effort also during the lockdown. It was very fun. Thanks to you too. The big question this morning is, was the education sector impacted? My first reaction would be definitely, the education sector was impacted. Everything was paralyzed, especially due to the school closure that made us all rethink education on Curacao. Second of all, there was an imbalance between students who were able to switch immediately to online education, virtual education, and those who were not able. The same counts for teachers. Some were able to switch swiftly, others were not. This combination created an opportunity for learning disadvantages. The new phenomena, also new phenomena were born. Last year, most of us enjoyed a staycation. Well, this year, we discovered this phenomenon, schoolcation. There were parents who were able to book tickets during the second lockdown and travel to some exciting destinations. on the ground that students will still be able to continue their classes, to attend their classes, because classes were online. You can imagine the gap between students when they return back to school after the second lockdown, comparing with them with the students who did not have any device or connectivity to continue their education. Some students had to choose to work instead of staying home. They picked up their jobs at the supermarkets to provide for their families. Yes, in this day and age, there are still students who need to provide for their family. These are impacted the most because in their case, it was all about survival during the lockdown. The last group I would like to highlight is the students of vocational education. Our current education system requires these students to be present at school for the training, for the classes to continue. The same counts for internships. They were all discontinued with all its consequences. If you ask me which part affected the most, I would personally say the social-emotional part of education. Schools are much more than being a daycare for children and students, a home for many students. Schools become the center for social well-being of students. Referrals to additional support, specialized support, is mostly done by schools. In fact, we take care of them for approximately 35 hours a week. Sometimes more than that. By the way, critics even suggested to reopen schools as soon as possible for the children to return to school so they can work at home, mind you. So I asked myself the following question: how can we better prepare for such unexpected disruptions in the future? I wrote 3 things: plan and invest in digital transformation, change our mindset on education, the shift from content-directed to metacognition. I will elaborate later. Have a policy on inclusion in the broader sense, and thinking especially about vulnerable situations. What are positive takeaways? Students and teachers, they learned differently and different things. It was fun for some of them, for most of them, I think. Protocols on health and safety were developed and implemented. We never had any protocols developed for schools besides a school plan and stuff. Investment in education. Public funded schools were provided with better sanitary facilities. And first investments were made to accelerate the digital transformation in education. So this is like some kind of summary of what I'm going to elaborate on later. What should we keep in mind? And I wrote 3 things: the vulnerable in every aspect, vulnerable students, but also vulnerable teachers, because there are vulnerable teachers. Teachers care, I wrote that as a second bullet, because you won't imagine how many teachers would need special support and guidance through these times. And a very important one, revision of state-required learning outcomes and curriculum. We are still working with a curriculum and program from early 2000 and maybe older programs. And by the way, the thing parents worry most about might be a stroke of luck. It might be premature for me to share this information, but the raw results on the final assessment of the foundation-based education assessment show a mild improvement in some areas, in student performance in some areas, compared to 2009. Dutch as a subject remains an area of concern. over the years, and this too should be evaluated. Bear in mind that these state-developed final assessments are made based on the state-required levels the students should reach at a certain age. So that's a very interesting development, but we're not there yet. We're in the middle of the process of evaluating the results of each student, and in a later phase we can share more details about how the students did, not only on the final assessment of the foundation-based education, but also the final exams of secondary education. So let's go to the sheets. Yeah, global disruption as an education development accelerator on Curaçao. We had to keep focused. We really had to keep focused on the goal, the prize we had to reach. We have to reach as a community. So education is very important. For my introduction, I use some of the keywords that will come back during the presentation, and I'm wondering which word would address the most how you felt. It was a crisis. It was really a crisis, and we were not really prepared for it, but we learned a lot. And during this session, I will elaborate on more information, details about this situation. So it affected education, recent developments, and courses, of course, processes that have experienced an acceleration. Closing, I will highlight some imperative actions that must be taken by the Ministry of Education and by the whole education sector to improve our reaction to this situation, to such interruptions. I had to share this sentence of Galileo Galilei. You cannot teach a man a thing. You can only help him find it for himself. Our education system is very focused on knowledge, cognition, but we really, really need to make the switch to metacognition. I also use, besides Galileo, a quotation from the Bible. It says in Proverbs 22, verse 6, "Train the child the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." I love the fact that it states, train up the child the way, not to know the way, but the way. The system. It's pure knowledge. That's why I connected it to what Galileo said. You cannot teach a man a thing, you can only help him find it for himself. In terms of knowledge, attitude, and skills, I would say knowledge can be found anywhere. Skills are available on YouTube. But the most important thing is to teach a man to have the right attitude, to have the skills to find knowledge. Beyond educating individuals, we need education to provide them skills that promote later life learning and engagement in schools and society. So we want to promote metacognition, the so-called gift that keeps on giving. We want to trigger each individual to be more conscious, reflective, and aware of his learning process along the way. I'm sharing this because when everything falls out, when there is no education, the perfect thing is to prepare the man to be able to develop himself on its own. And I think that's how we need to form and prepare our students for the future. A decent educational system will directly contribute to this goal. Main purpose of education, contributing to this goal, quoting Facila Idris, to educate individuals within society to prepare and qualify them for work in the economy as well as to integrate people into society and teach them values and morals of society. I will elaborate later. Well, while preparing, I had to go back and think what were the situations which caused disruptions in the past. And I stopped at the most popular three situations. Flooding, we have known the largest flooding we have known was in the year 2010. I don't know if you guys remember, it was in October or November 2010, Curacao was paralyzed, and that was the first moment where education was paused, disrupted a bit due to flooding. A very popular one is power outage, Kuryente Bay. So it's a very popular. We had a recent one last year in November. So besides the fact that schools were disrupted due to the pandemic, we also experienced a power outage. And of course, the popular strike, when the government and the bonds do not seem to align. So those were the common situations where disruptions would happen in education. Well, we were surprised with COVID. And I wrote this part down. I'm also part of the strategic team, and we dialogue and make decisions on a national level on how to proceed, considering the current situation on the island. And COVID-19 did not seem to be of any concern for the local education system until it made its entrance on March 13, 2020. When a non-resident appeared to be infected with the virus. The discovery and revelation was considered serious enough for the local government to take action. The Commander-in-Chief, after consulting the Directorate of Risk Management and Disaster Policy, has decided to declare a state of emergency after considering the possible risks and implications for public health. The Directorate of Risk Management has already been monitoring all developments around the COVID pandemic together with the professionals assigned by the Ministry of Public Health. All ministries have been involved and informed of the measures which were to be taken as from that moment, which is November last year. Considering the fact that little was known about the development and effect of this virus, on the island, serious measures were taken. One of the preventive measures was the first complete school closure as from March 17. This made history due to the length of it. Later, I will provide you some more information about the exact school closure dates. The first statement that struck me and remained with me through the whole pandemic was from the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Economic Development. He stated clearly, under pressure, everything becomes fluid. And it struck me because in the educational sector, we are very structured and working in strict programs with exams and stuff. So we do not know any, and we do not experience any pressure that would change things. Well, actually, everything changed due to this pandemic. And coming back to the title of my presentation, I had to quote Winston Churchill. And I was glad that it was mentioned yesterday by the social discussion, social impact. Never let a good crisis go to waste. It is the opportunity to evaluate. It is the opportunity to evaluate, to program, reprogram the whole organization of the sector. So that's what we did. It is important to realize the aim of our ministry, of our education system. Just want to elaborate shortly about our vision on education, but also the function of education so we can compare it to what the impacts were for our education system. We aim to achieve educated and holistically developed individuals who are able to contribute to the development of a continually changing community in an organic age. In our National Development Plan, I can quote what we said, every citizen of Curaçao must have equal access to quality education where they are offered the best opportunities to develop their full potential. So to be able to develop, give people opportunity to develop to their full potential, all the conditions must be in place. And let me elaborate shortly on the function of education. The education system has the important role in qualifying people, socializing people, and selection and allocation. With qualifying, we would mean acquisition of knowledge, skills, and attitude. With socializing, the transfer of generally accepted values and standards, important conditions for all social cohesion and continuity. And with selection allocation, connecting the individual to matching education, training, or providing access to the labor market. So with these roles, you can easily evaluate what impact such a lockdown would have on the education system. This is a very important quote here. The COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of education systems in human history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 200 countries. Closures of schools, institutions, and other learning spaces have impacted more than 94% of the world's students' population. This has brought far-reaching changes in all aspects of our lives. Social distancing, restrictive movements, policies have significantly disturbed the traditional educational practices, most definitely. To be able to share with you some experiences we had on, with regards to the impact of the pandemic on our educational system, we spoke to principals, we spoke to a few students, we spoke to policymakers, and based on their input, I will share with you some very important insights. Despite the fact that in some previous coronavirus outbreaks, evidence suggested that transmission in schools was very low or absent, the sudden lockdown triggered fear and insecurities, causing a lot of disruption. I think that would be the biggest impact the pandemic had directly on the education system in Curaçao. People were scared. They were paralyzed. And that's why I wrote about the reaction. They froze, they tend to fight, and they tend to flee from the situation. But we are resilient people. We bounce back very fast. And that was the reaction too. Let me share some information about the school closures with you. I'm comparing the school closure data from 2020 and from 2021. In 2020, we had a complete school closure starting from March 17 to May 15th. I guess I wrote down the amount. Those were approximately 39 days, effective school dates. And after that, we have known a partial school closure, and that was between May 18th and July 9th. What we did is that we slowly started to reopen schools, and we have chosen to start off with the final year of the foundation-based education groups, groep 8, what we call in Curaçao, and the final exams groups from the secondary education, and that also counted for the vocational education SBO. In that period, the other groups missed about 39 school days. After that, we have also known significant disruptions, and that would be between September 28th and December 18th, and that was due to a decision made to only house 50% of the classroom capacity from grade 8 and higher, the so-called cohort here on Curacao. So from September 28 up to the December holidays, 50% of the room capacity was used. So you might imagine that different options were used. Sometimes 1 week, let's say part A of the group would be present and the other group would be at home, sometimes with take-home packages and sometimes without. And the next week they would switch. There were also other combinations, like every other day a group would be at school. If we compare it with 2021, in this year there was a lockdown, but there were no complete school closures. There was a partial school closure, and that was between March 29th and April 23, the 23rd. And that was, why do we call it a partial school closure? Because we excluded, we gave an exemption to the final exam groups, including the last year of the foundation-based education. Significant disruptions in 2021. What we did is, and this was based on the advice of the experts of the Department of Health, every student 18 years and older were suggested to remain at home. So that counted for the vocational education, in particular SBO. I'm going to accelerate my presentation due to the timing. Dr. Odette will share more insights on and figures about the challenges with distance learning, but I'm going to share specifically for the public school boards some analysis we made. I'm not going into details, but this was the first check we made last year in May and June. What we noticed is that for the public schools, 71% of the students had internet connection. And for the, with regards to a laptop, and then specifically a laptop, 28% of the students did have access to a laptop available for educational purposes. You must keep in mind that the homes were not prepared either. There might have been laptops and tablets at home, but if there is a family of 4 or 5 and everybody has to work and follow virtual classes, those devices would not be enough. So we did not have any grip on the social situation, on the situation at home. But this was very shocking for us to know what the situation was at the public schools. But later on, we will get a whole view based on the research the university did. And let me share with you some of the impacts. The pandemic only underlined dirt such as the weakness of online teaching infrastructure, the limited exposure of teachers to online teaching, the information gap, non-deductive environment for learning at home, and inequity. So we had a lot of discussions with professionals in the Caribbean, but also in the Latin American area. those who experienced similar situation as in Curacao, and we concluded that the immediate education response challenges were the technical readiness, the content readiness, and the pedagogical readiness. With regards to the technical readiness, the delivery and household access. Like I said, not all households did have an internet access and devices. With regards to the content, providing virtual classes is completely different than regular classes. With regard to pedagogical readiness, the skills required for giving virtual classes are different. Parents and caregivers were not prepared. That's why I mentioned there were funny situations when classes were given through virtual way. A lot of teachers used Zoom, and it went okay, but there were really funny situations due to the fact that most people do not have a working space for everybody at home. So you might have like an office for your things, but students do not really have a desk dedicated for them for virtual classes. What the school principals shared with us is that there was a lot of stress, fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and exhaustion within their corps. And I can, when going back in my mind, I can remember in December 2020 how exhausted the education field was. And thank God we had some holidays, and that brought up some energy to the teachers, but it was very exhausting, especially due to the fear and the uncertainties with regards to our classes going to continue, etc. There were limited tools and resources, and not only at home, but also in schools. Our schools are not really prepared for virtual classes. Because in my vision, I project schools to be shelters during school closures, during lockdowns, especially for the vulnerable. But not even schools are adequately prepared for lockdowns and to provide virtual classes, like decent cameras and decent computers and stuff. So that's a very important action we need to take in the digital transformation process. And of course, last but absolutely not least, educational disadvantages of certain groups. I elaborated on that during my introduction. We also discovered superpowers. We always try to see and detect positive developments in this situation. What we detected were student flexibility. They were very flexible when switching from personal education to digital, virtual educations. What we notice is that students love school. They love to go to school. They love to meet their peers. So that was a positive trigger, especially when they returned back to school. Students learned differently. Like I said, they not only learned differently, but they also learned different things, and that enriched their knowledge. What we also appreciated was the teachers' flexibility and creativity, because they made it happen within the limitations that they had, but they made it happen, and that was very positive. What we also noticed is that the teachers care for students. What we observed is that all teachers had contact with their students through WhatsApp, through email, through messages, and that was one of the medium the teachers used to keep in touch with students and with the parents, and that was a very important medium, and that brought forth a lot of positive development and fruits. Teachers went the extra mile. We know that teachers not only work from 7:30 to 1 o'clock, Most of them were busy up to 7 o'clock in the evening. They were still working. They were still dedicating to teaching and helping their students. I know also teachers who went at home to the students when we had the Plaatje die Dia. There were certain days you could drive to the supermarket and stuff. They used that opportunity to go to school to pick up material and drop them off at the parents' house and etc. So there were very positive developments and teachers going to the extra mile. Resilience of both school boards and the government, and willingness with regards to public-private partnership. That is a very positive development with regards to the effects of this pandemic. Of course, we experience a lot of challenges in the educational sector. Yeah, financial constraints, budget cuts. Due to the situation, a lot of funds had to be invested in families in poverty to provide food, basic needs for families. Distraction was a challenge, both local as international. And what do I mean with distraction? People were provided and with a lot of information. And with information, I mean positive and negative information with regards to the pandemic. And that brought a lot of fear, and not only fear and anxiety, but also disrespect to the educational sector. So they had to withstand a lot of attacks from the outer world, from parents and stuff. Deal with fear. That's why I mentioned the care for personnel is very important and an area we need to invest in. Insecurities, due to the fact that you do not know what will happen next. It was very unexpected what happened. You cannot really plan how to go through your program, and that was very uncomfortable for the education sector. And of course, poor data collection and processing. It is in these times that we notice how poor our data collection systems are, and to process and to develop data-driven policies. So that is a very large challenge, and we are working on it. And reaching the unreachable, of course. And poverty. What we have received as input from the school principals are, with regards to educational disadvantage, they would say, give us the space and the funds and we'll make it happen. What do they mean with space? We have a very strict law, educational law, which do not provide a lot of space to the schools to provide more time and provide more assistance to the students. So we kept strictly to the law, because there are a few things we have to manage as the Ministry of Education, but that was their first plead. Give us more space, give us more time, so we can, and funds, and that's a very important one. I already said that there was a very big challenge, and that would be the budget cuts we experienced the last few years. But what principals say, give us the space and the funds and we'll make it happen. We will work on the learning disadvantages and it will be okay. And with regards to the stress, fear, anxiety, they pleaded to provide better safety net for teachers, better alignment between government and bonds, because there was no alignment between those two, which triggered a lot of discussion and a lot of discomfort for the education sector. And cultivate sympathy, tolerance, and understanding, because there seemed to be not enough tolerance and sympathy towards the educational system. And you noticed that in the way parents and other particular people manage the schools, they attend to the school. And what they also pleaded is for the government to act decisively. They want us to move more concrete and fast during this process. And finally, I want to share a few positive developments. And with regards to the title of my presentation, Keeping the Eyes on the Prize, there were processes that were accelerated, and it's very important for me to share a bit about them. The implementation of the digital transformation was definitely accelerated. All government-funded schools are provided with high-speed internet as from this week. We are very proud to announce that, and that's only the beginning. There's a lot to be done, but that's a very important part of the digital transformation we are going through. Development and approval of a blended learning policy. We are very proud to announce that our policy department developed this blended learning policy, which will create more space for the schools to provide a blended learning. We called it blended learning and not only virtual learning, because we do think that for the time being, it must be blended. That would work best for the situation, considering the social situation of our students. An education agenda with focus on agenda Education 2030 was developed. Birth of a research and development initiative for sustainable educational knowledge development. Well, it's cooking. That's why I called it birth. I will contact the University of Education for this development. It's very interesting, and we want to invest a bit more in what we call a kennisnet. And we will have some discussion with the university about this. Modernization and upgrading of school buildings. We are working with school buildings dating from the 1950s and maybe older. And you can imagine the electrical systems are very old and they cannot process all computers and Wi-Fi and internet and virtual classes. So we are working on upgrading them. I will show you just a view of what the situation is with regards to the assessments we did, and education quality analysis due to the budget support we are receiving from Holland. Part of the agreement is to effect a education quality analysis. We are planning two types of analysis, but in a later stage I will share with you some of the details. So this is the roadmap we developed with regards to the digital transformation. We are at the current phase, we already provided the schools with high-speed internet, and Microsoft 365 is also being installed and trainings are being given. We are also developing an internal transformation, because we are still working as the Ministry of Education with the old Excel sheets and hard copies to be signed by principals when they provide information to the government. We are going to eliminate that hopefully by August 2021. We are doing what we called a parallel system. We will still we require the Excel sheets, but they will be imported in a digital system we created, the so-called CLOA. This is just to give you a view of the blueprint of the unit and details we are going to address. A very positive development is that we have automized the transfer from foundation-based education to secondary education. The so-called educational report on the wiskundig report has been completely revised and digitalized. So it has been imported in a government-owned system, and we thank all those who contributed to this system, and through this system we are going to provide a lot more support to schools. So these are all positive triggers, things triggered by the pandemic. and of course the agenda 20 on the educational agenda, and we are going to focus on quality, infrastructure, education financing, and the governance around education. And this is very interesting. What we did is a large-scale assessment on the situation around the school buildings on Curacao. Like we said, they are very old buildings, and what we can see is that 30% of the schools are in a very bad situation. So we are negotiating with Holland and preparing a school building maintenance plan, and our focus is to focus all the money on where it belongs, and we think it's on the schools that are in bad situation, but balancing it with the capacity of the schools, and if there are enough students, if there is an opportunity for this school to continue. So we are going to evaluate a lot of details before choosing the investments we are going to make. And finally, this is a funny picture of the team working on the education quality analysis. So what you see here is a combination of professionals of the Dutch inspectorate in Holland and the local inspectorate, and we added some additional experts to the team, especially researchers who are going to enrich the system. We have tried to balance it out with local people, especially to consider the local context, because you can invite others to do the research for you, the evaluation for you, but if they do not know or understand the context, there might be issues, challenges with regards to the results. And I think these are the last sheets. There are positive regional developments, exchange of good practices within Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a lot of contact and dialogue. The professional development opportunities, we were provided with free virtual learning classes for teachers last year, and as we speak, we are preparing a training, Blackboard Academy, through UNESCO for our teachers too, and Microsoft 365 with Curacao as forerunner. We have signed a agreement with Microsoft to execute this one. Look, I will skip this one and go directly to some imperative actions and priorities. In closing, the imperative action, explicit policy on inclusion, is a very, very important action we have to take. And this one considering the fact that not only children with certain limitations, but especially vulnerable situations, children in vulnerable situations, an urgent revision and updating of state-required learning outcomes on all levels is definitely required and imperative. Data-driven decision-making is imperative. Condition education. We should condition educational funding to improvement actions based on data analysis. We have a lot of data. We do not use it in the right way. So that is imperative for us to take action. Prioritize education nationally, invest in the future of education. Monitoring student dropouts and disengagement. Complete concept of remediation program. We have designed a remediation program for our schools, especially focused on educational disadvantages due to the pandemic, and new approaches on learning assessment. And this is also part of the blended learning policy we spoke about. Formalize and maintain implemented hygiene measures, professional development policy, to prepare teachers better for future in the event of such a pandemic and school closures, and intensify psychosocial support, well-being and mental health, both for students and for teachers. And in closing, education must become a national priority. It might sound a bit cliche, but it is a must. If we think as education as investing in the future, it must be a priority. And that would be my personal plea to the government, to the new coalition, and starting off to really focus on making education a national priority. We must invest in technology, especially ICT, and the digital transformation. We must invest in contemporary pedagogy, especially for the changing situations we are living in. We must actualize and modernize content, and this is a repetition of what I already said, and this might be a bit gevoelig, but we must depoliticize education. We must disconnect education from politics. It is a must. I wanted to say it, and I did, and continue closing this part, and promote public-private partnership. So we are very excited about a few companies approaching us, especially to help us invest in the digital transformation. So it's very interesting. We're excited, and that's why I experienced this pandemic as an accelerator for positive development, and hopefully together we can make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Dr. Anders Vladimir Kleinmoedig on this very interesting presentation. Some very interesting final remarks. I'm sure we will get back to them when we have the opportunity to have some discussions. I want to encourage everyone, once again, you can send in your questions via WhatsApp. You will see the number in the screen below. You can send your questions via the chat box in the live stream as well. Our next speaker for today is Dr. Odette van Brumen-Girigori. She's going to talk about the experience with home education sustained by digital technology during the pandemic. There's a very interesting research that they've done on this subject into seeing, and we will be presented with some interesting numbers. I took a look at the research, so this will be very interesting. Dr. Odette van Brumen-Girigori graduated as a psychologist with a major in development psychology, social psychology, and an additional major in labor organization and staff psychology. All of this in the Netherlands at the Rijksuniversiteit Groningen. She obtained in 2015 her doctor's degree in psychology at the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences in Groningen as well. And a very interesting topic, that's very with an added value here in Curacao, of course, as in the topic of father absence. So very interesting. She's registered as a child and youth psychologist, and she is working as a scientist and lecturer here at the University of Curacao, Dr. Moises Frumencio da Costa Gomes. She has a very extensive CV, a curriculum with a lot of psychological and social research on various topics. Very interesting, and more than anything, we are very interested in her research about the impact of COVID-19 on the experience on education at home. I give the floor to Dr. Odette.
Thank you, Joanne, for the introduction. I will first search for my PowerPoint before I can start. Sí. Okay. Good morning, bon dia to all participants. I feel very honored that I got the opportunity to share with you the findings of my research entitled Experience with Home Education Sustained by Digital Technology During the Pandemic. The goals of our study was to assess the experiences of students living on Curaçao that have received home education supported by digital learning due to the measures of the pandemic 2020. For the sake of clarity, we didn't include students that receive home education without digital support. So we have chosen for a very selected group those who received home education with support of digital technology. Therefore, we wanted to assess to what extent these students had also the resources necessary to follow home education supported by digital technology in an effective way. We wanted also to know if their need for social contact and also their need for competence were fulfilled. And finally, we wanted to assess the attitude of the students regarding receiving home education in the future. Our study was approved by the Ethical Committee of Social Science at the University of Curaçao. Recruitment of our participants took place through various channels such as press, social media, and snowball effect. We are very grateful that our study was funded by the Chair of Financial Management Science, Lionel Paps Capriles. As a gesture of appreciation, 10 MCB gift cards were drawn among the participants after the study. It is important to mention that we conducted a quantitative research. We used an online questionnaire, and it took approximately 7 minutes to fill in. The questionnaire were offered in Papiamento and Dutch, and our initial sample consisted of 622 students, but 95 students didn't complete the questionnaire completely. Therefore, they were removed from the sample. So our final sample consisted of 527 students living on Curaçao. It is also noteworthy to mention that our research team consisted also of Dr. Pieternel Dijkstra and Dr. Dick Barrels from the University of Groningen, living in the Netherlands. So, our results. It is important to mention that often those students who followed education sustained by digital technology had often a quiet study place. That is something that Vladimir already mentioned, that they have sometimes trouble to get a place to sit quietly and focus so they can follow the classes. There were also trouble with functioning computers or a laptop. Not everyone had a decent mobile or telephone, and they didn't have always internet connection that were working like they desired. And a lot of students didn't have enough time to follow home education. So these are some of the challenges, but Vladimir mentioned already a lot of them. So I will continue with other findings that we all also found. Many students were also forced to buy several devices to enable effective home education sustained by digital technology, such as printing supplies, laptop devices, internet connection they had to pay for, and other matters. Many students missed also the opportunity to consult with their teacher if they had any questions. They also mentioned that they miss the social contacts and interactions with their classmates and friends. This is also one point that Vladimir already mentioned. Many students didn't feel competent enough to attend home education in an effective way. They didn't know how to approach learning at home. It was very new, and they had also a lot of other distractions like gaming, social media, babysitting, or they had also a job because they also needed to work in order to survive. The majority of the students experience home education as less positive than regular education. Therefore, they were also very happy when the lockdown was over. Many students felt also that home education had a negative impact on their psychological well-being, school motivation, and school performance. Almost half of the students showed a negative attitude towards home education in the future. What are our recommendations? It is very important to help parents and students create conditions under which homeschooling can take place effectively. It is also important to facilitate access to properly functioning laptop or computer by arranging funding or loan for students in need. It is also important to make students and parents aware what they need in order to create a proper environment for home education. For example, by using a checklist. The government or educational institutions can make also a number of locations available for students. For example, buildings or schools that are empty or not being used. It is also advisable to stimulate digital groups, online platforms such as Zoom or Teams to work on assignments. It is also noteworthy to mention that it may be a good idea to arrange that someone from the school is online available if students have difficulties with a subject. It is also important to organize on a regular basis digital question and ask sessions where students are able to ask questions about the material. It is also imperative that teachers adopt an autonomy supporting attitude instead of a directive attitude. And we must also think about offering the teachers training or a workshop regarding autonomy supporting teaching because we cannot assume that all teachers master these skills. It is also important that teachers ask their students how the learning process is going and whether they can use some assistance. Be proactive instead of reactive. Offer the students digital training regarding self-regulated learning, how to learn, how to evaluate, adjust, and motivate themselves to learn. Teachers should also provide assignments and instructions that encourage self-regulated learning in order to make their students effective home learners. And finally, institutions may be aware that they have to make adjustments due to the new circumstances, adapt programs, make a selection of relevant subjects. And we expect also a better alignment between government and school boards. Now, that was very quick. And I'm at the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward for the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Udat van Brumen. The time is here, the time for the discussion. I want to thank once again both speakers for their very interesting insights, for these results as well of a very interesting study, research that was conducted. I want to remind everybody that they can send in their questions via the number in the page. And you can also send your questions in the chat box. But if you want some more privacy and you don't want to give away your name, or you just want to ask a question, I know we have journalists watching with us as well. You can send the questions you have on these presentations at this moment. Let's start with some questions that we already received during the presentation. Dr. Vladimir Kleinmoedig, there was a question based on the imbalance that you said that was there was during the switching over. So how will we remedy the situation now for the learning disadvantages that was created during this pandemic?
Well, I think we have to think in two terms, short-term and long-term. With regards to short-term, what we did is provide access to school for the disadvantaged students. That was a large discussion, especially during the second lockdown, but that was a very good solution for the problem. Students who do not have access to internet or do not have an adequate device are best helped if they come to school, where they can meet the teachers in smaller groups and they get the attention they would not be able to receive. What we did also prior to the second lockdown is to have teachers prepare take-home packages. And that was an example we took from the discussions we had with the colleagues in the Latin America and Caribbean area region. So that also helped. It is not as effective as real-time education, but it helped to limit disadvantages. So, and what we are preparing is a long-term inclusion policy where we are going to focus on these types of vulnerable groups. And the presentation Dr. Odette also highlighted some of the issues we need to address in this policy. So in both short term, we are going to use schools as shelters where vulnerable kids can access school, can have contact with teachers in smaller groups, taking into account all the rules and measures with regards to COVID or any other pandemic that might present. But on long term, we are going to work on a policy directed on inclusion.
This is for in the case that there should be another crisis or a situation in which these circumstances come into place. So the question is also to Dr. Uda, the recommendations are based on creating conditions under which homeschooling can take place effectively. But the damage for now is done. How are we going to remedy the damage, if we may call it damage, done now?
I think it's very important to assess the damage, and maybe I can share that it's a regular process that you assess where the students are each year, and the teachers do that to see how far they are from what the state required. And we have special programs we apply to remediate possible disadvantages, and that is what the policy we are developing is focused on. Assessing where the students are with regards to where they need to be, and applying a special program with special application of differentiation, because that is a very important tool for remediating possible disadvantages, and so being able to bring them back to the level. An example of that was in August when we started. We opened school for the rest of the groups. It was not that easy for the teachers. What we understood is that schools were remediating up to November. When started in August, they took August up to November to remediate possible disadvantages, especially, and this is a very interesting fact. The groups that were affected the most were the groep 3, what we used to call eerste klas in the past, where the students learn how to read and write. So that was the group that was mostly affected by the pandemic, because they just started reading and writing in 2019, and then in March up to the end of the school year, they were at home. And not all the students were triggered enough to keep on reading, to keep on writing. So it was very difficult for the schools to remediate the disadvantage they experienced. But it's a regular process. But besides the regular process, we are working also on focusing on the most essential parts they should dominate. They should be fluent in. And that is still a discussion. There is still discussion. That's why the policy has not been approved yet. So we are in the phase of consultation with experts, but also we are heading to a consultation with the educational field to receive their input, because it's a collaborative action we should take.
How well do we know that what the disadvantages really were in data for students? If I may take the example of the foundation-based education group, the final exam groups as well, does the Ministry of Education have a clear view or gather data as to what happened to this first group, the class of 2020, that graduated without actually knowing if they were up to the level of the next level they were going to? Did the Ministry of Education during this school year follow these students? Do we have data to see how they are doing and really have measured what the damage was to them?
Not yet. The Inspectorate of Education is preparing this investigation, and I would suggest us we will have to come back on this specific development, as the school year has not finished yet. So we are monitoring them. We are also in dialogue, in contact with the principals to see what their discoveries are. And based on that, we saw and noticed that especially groep 3, the eerste klas, we used to call, where the students start off with reading and writing. And groep 5 was also a problem. But like you said, an interesting very interesting information is how the students that went from foundation-based education to secondary education did. I know already that some of them had to change to a more vocational approach.
So a downgrade in their level.
Exactly. And upgrades. But upgrades would mostly happen at the end of the school year. So you do have downgrades, but also upgrades, because it's natural that sometimes students receive a VSBO, PSVE recommendation, advies from their principal, but do better in secondary education. It's a process we do monitor 2 or more years in secondary education. So it shouldn't be a problem, because as the education system, we do monitor how they do and provide them the remedial teaching they would need in case that is needed.
Okay, so because we do know that there are parents that are not really happy with the whole guidance in the process. Okay. So you're not just monitoring the situation, but you're also available for intermediation.
Yeah, I think it's very important for those parents to be in close contact with the principals, because they manage the whole process in their schools. And if they are not happy, they can always go to the school boards where the superintendent of schools can guide the process, can monitor and see if the process is developing as expected. And in the third phase, if they are not convinced or satisfied, they can always go to the inspectorate.
There's a question coming in, wants to know if you compare the upgrades or the downgrades with previous years, if it's significantly more.
We cannot say with precision right now.
You don't have preliminary
No,
data?
not yet. That's why I spoke to our inspectorate, and by August we will have more specific information about this because the school year has not ended yet. And we are right now in the phase where the teams are discussing what will happen with the students. So I would prefer to come back with this concrete information by August.
Another and last question about this part of the discussion. You mentioned that there will be tools and methods developed into helping, to help students overcome the information that they're lacking in their in the situation now. But the one that needs to be carrying this out are teachers that are underpaid and overworked. How is the ministry going to deal with this?
Okay, of course, to intervene in those situations, we are installing a team that is going to work out the evaluation and improvement of the conditions of the teacher's situation, rechtspositie. I don't know the word exactly, but the labor conditions, no? So it is an ongoing process, I can say. One of those interventions is promoting teachers from A to B. That is, we have reserved the amount of money for that, but we are also analyzing and evaluating the whole system to see how we can improve the situation and compare it to the area, the comparable situations, to make it better and more attractive, because we need more teachers. A little detail that won't make it better is the VVU, teachers who are born in 1957, 58, 59, and I think 1960 can go with an early retirement.
Do we know how many teachers will be leaving the system?
We do.
How many?
That's approximately 130.
And what does this mean for the education?
For some
now?
school boards, that wouldn't have any effect, because we do also see a diminishing amount of students in our system. So if the system consisted of 31,000 students a few years ago, we're now at 29,000. You are practically noticing how less teachers are needed. But beside that, we are working with the University of Curaçao for the provision of teachers who are graduating. But we are also providing the school boards with the possibilities to recruit teachers from abroad. And I think we're talking about Holland and possibly also from Suriname.
Do we know how many teachers we will be needing? Since 130 are leaving or retiring early.
Exactly.
So taking into account that you have less students, how many teachers? Do we have the data for this?
We do have the data, and it's at least 27. And we are in the process of recruitment. Like there are each school board has a different situation. Like the public school board will not have any problem with it. but a larger school board like the Roman Catholic School Board do have a problem, and we are working on a few possibilities, and we are also trying to promote people to choose for to become a teacher. And we are also in discussion with the university to provide what we call in Dutch zij-instroomtraject. A dual trajectory where they work and study at the same time. So there are a few options we are working on.
But what would this mean for the quality of education?
It depends on how you organize it. We have this is a example of what we are going, but we do have other options that would be better. First of all, to maintain the quality of education, the first action we should take is recruit. We should recruit in here, especially new teachers coming from the university. If there are none available, if all of them has been placed and there are none available, the second phase would be recruiting teachers in Holland and possibly in Suriname. And there are some other options that might work. A little detail is that in the secondary education, it's much more easier to bring in someone who do have the qualities but do not have a license to teach, and you train them on the job and they follow like pedagogically preparation to teach. That would be easier in secondary education. The problem would be in the foundation-based education, because you have what we call generalisten, generally prepared teachers who give different subjects, and that is more difficult. So we are focusing on that specific group, because that would be the challenge to recruit or retrain people to take the office. Or both, exactly.
We have a question in the chat box. Instead of PPP, why not public, private, and community partnership? It mobilizes stakeholders, organizations, communities, tapping the power of education. They combine transformational leadership, shared goals, community values to create educational access, equity, outcomes, quality, and ethical choices. So that's the question. Why, instead of PPP, why not PPCP?
I think it's a very interesting suggestion, and I will take it with me and discuss it with the project team, because we would like to include the community as much as possible, and if there are interested organizations and people who want to contribute, they are more than welcome, considering the situations we are in right now.
During the presentations, the point of, let me check the question. This revision of state is required for the outcomes and curriculum. We have heard this quite often and for quite some time now. So is it finally in revision?
Yes, it is. It's a continual process, I should say, because you will never stop revising the curriculum and state-required learning outcomes. The focus is right now on vocational education, and that's why we have the collaboration between the education sector and the labor market, the ROA, and they are right now in revising all the learning outcomes required for the vocational education. But what we noticed in this pandemic is that revision of the whole educational system is required. And like I said, to have students learn differently and provide them metacognition skills. And that is very important for to trigger also lifelong learning, because that's what you want to trigger in people, that after graduating you'll still have to develop, and we have to twist our state-required learning outcomes a bit, focusing on a more modern education outcomes.
Another interesting question is based on the financial constraints. There are additional financial constraints, budget cuts. How does, because education before the COVID-19 crisis, we all know the situation in Curacao, one might say that our education has been in crisis for a while. So how do these financial constraints and the additional budget cuts affect the quality of education? Where did the Ministry of Education cut? On what did they cut additionally now?
Okay, I have good news. We do not have new cuts for 2021. I'm very grateful for that. I'm praying, and it will stay like that.
Compared to
2020 and 2021. But what we are doing is investing the funds more effectively, because that is also an evaluation we are doing internally. We have a lot of foundations producing the same products, results, and we are working on a plan to join the foundations and to provide better service to the education sector. I don't want to sound rude, but that's kind of spilling money, spoiling money. That's why we are revising all activities in our budget, in our funding, every area. And it's important to understand that the total budget of education is 360 million, of which, let's say 240,000 goes only to salaries in the education sector. So
it's underfunded, because the salaries, if you speak to the
exactly.
teachers, they would say, I'm underpaid for everything I do.
Exactly. So if you have to revise their labor conditions, we cannot realize that with the same budget, with the same funds. So that's why I also stated that nationally we should re-evaluate education. We have to make it a national priority and to put also the necessary funds to make it happen.
How much more?
Well, the evaluation must reveal how much more it has to be. But stating that 240 out of 360 is going only to salaries, you can make the necessary calculation to see how many we invest in materials. Because the rest is going to other foundations, to personnel, ministry personnel, cultural services, sports, science. So it's very limited. So a whole revision and re-evaluation of the system is necessary to make progress. And that's why we are very happy with the education quality analysis, because that will reveal not only with regards to education quality, where we stand, but also conditions. We also included the condition, the governance around education, because we think it's very important to have a whole view of the system, and hopefully we will receive funding for the actions we will have to take after revising the whole system.
Dr. Udat, out of the results from the research, it was stated that majority of students experience home education as less positive. They felt that it had a negative impact on their well-being. Almost half of the students showed a negative attitude towards home education in the future. So should another lockdown come, more than half of the students are not excited, to say in the least, about this possibility. What does this mean, or could it have an impact on possible policy changes in how to go about education, seeing as to where some people are saying we should go, like more home schooling, use more technology, less buildings, less. Would this affect? Would these results affect a possible policy?
Of course, but I must say it is a yes and also a no. because the results of the students being unhappy with home education supported by digital technology was related to their previous experience, their negative experience. So students that had a negative experience regarding not lacking these decent laptop devices, lacking social contact, lacking the opportunity to consult with their teachers. So those factors create also a negative experience and a negative attitude toward future homeschooling. So it is important, I look also to Vladimir, it is important to tackle these issues, and if we tackle these issues, their experience will get better and their attitude will change also. So it's very important to realize that it's related to the negative experience that they had because nothing was prepared, or a lot of students were not prepared for this change.
But would it not require investments that
Of course.
we as a community would not be able to handle, it's safe to say? Because if you look at the research, most of the points that were brought up, a safe workplace or study room, technological devices, the access to the internet, these are all things that parents should pay in an already shrinking economy. Yesterday we heard in the economic session that basically you could say Curaçao is doing as the worst in the Caribbean as a shrinking economy. So how realistic is this?
No, that's why also I suggested that it's important to realize that we have to invest for also in students that has less opportunities to buy a computer, a laptop, that we can arrange maybe places where they can go, and schools, empty buildings where they can meet in order to follow the classes. So that's one of the interventions that they can consider in order to compensate for those who are not having a quiet study place, who are not having the right devices, etc., etc.
So the government should invest in
Yes,
filling
and
those
also
gaps.
be aware, because I think because of all the challenges that we had, it was not a priority to focus also on those in need. That's also one of the challenges, I think the big challenges in the future, but that's something that Vladimir already mentioned, that they are going to focus more on the vulnerable groups in the future.
During the pandemic, the last year and a half, there has been some temporary changes due to the whole situation, the lockdowns, the measures. Are there some temporary measures or changes that should become permanent if it were up to one of you or both of you?
Yes, of course, because that was also one of my suggestions. I think we need to learn from what happened. It happened twice, and I think we can learn more than we have done. So I think that we have to change what I already said, our way of teaching also, and preparing the students by promoting a more autonomy way of learning to make them also more effective learners. And we have also to train the students how to learn effectively, because what it was revealed that a lot of students didn't know how to arrange the whole thing. Okay, I'm at home, I don't have, I have to do my homework, I have to learn, but I have a lot of distractions because they are not used to learn on their own. They are used to being told what to do, being told to, you have to do this, you have to do that, and I think we have changed that way of teaching, that directive way, and make it more autonomy.
But who is going to carry the weight of the impact, the negative impact hereof? Because now you do have kids, it's safe to say, that are at the end of a school year that need to either go to another one or they stay in the same class. Actually, that they missed the boat.
Yes, unfortunately.
Who is going, because while we are monitoring, are doing research on how this impacted the quality and this and that, and thinking about possible policies and talking about the lack of funds, you have kids
that
you
are
have
suffering.
actual living, breathing kids right now that are very preoccupied about their future. They are lost with no guidance, teachers who are overworked and underpaid in a system. that's not, maybe not a fair question, but how are we going to remedy the situation now? No child left behind.
Yes, but I must be very honest with you. I don't believe that we are really trying not to let any child behind.
So you were letting our kids down.
I think that's what's going on, if I'm honest. And it's not because of the government, it's because of a lack of resources, because of lack of paternal of investment, that a lot of parents don't have the resources or the facility or the education to keep on going with the flow of the education. So it's not only the pandemic is a problem, it's a big problem that we have to deal with a long time ago. And I think it's important now that we realize more than before that we have to do something now. But first of all, I think we have to start accepting, and that's also a big challenge, accepting that we have to deal with the damage. And we have also to accept that the intervention cannot be applicable very quick. We have to be patient. We have to be patient, we have to be realistic. And if we don't do that, we will be inclined to force the children also because of the classes that they miss. We will force the children to learn a lot of material subjects that are not realistic because they have also a specific learning capacity. And if we are focused on, we have to remediate the damage in a short time, you will force the children. If you force the children, they will get frustrated, they will get demotivated, and the education will not be effective. So I will ask to think about that and realize it's not realistic. We have to deal with an invisible war, that's COVID. That's the fact. So we have to accept that we have damage, and we have to think about the program, how we can adapt, but how we can also take care of those left behind in a very responsible way. And not only those who were left behind, but also the children that have a lot of resources, they will also get frustrated. They will also get demotivated if we continue with the focus we have to control the damage. We have to control the damage. Sorry, I'm a psychologist. It's nonsense. It's a nonsense because everyone has a specific capacity to learn. And now we are not thinking rational about what is possible for a child. So that's what I want to make clear.
I want to support Dr. Odette in this. It's real, and we have to recognize that we are in a crisis. We are still in a crisis, and sometimes I have the feeling that we do not realize enough that it is a crisis, and the damage will take time to remediate the situation, not only in education but also in all the other sectors. So it is very important to be exactly. You mentioned the right words: patient and realistic in this process. And we have the advantage that in education we do have the children for a longer period. Why do I say this? Having disadvantages is not new to the education system. It's actually a continual process. And by investing time and being patient and working data-driven, you can address possible disadvantages and focus on improving the development of the students. So it is a crisis. I underline the fact that Dr. Odette said we have to be patient and realistic, and we have to detect what the disadvantages are and work on a program, not forcing the students, but giving them time to develop and come up to par with their knowledge, skills, and attitude. And I want to just give another contribution on your question about what things we should should be permanent. I think on government level, the collaboration, the interministerial collaboration, because we had very good collaboration with other ministries, in particular the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Development, especially those two. Because there are a lot of things we can address together, especially on the inclusion matter, children with special needs. We have to invest more time and money in this sector, because they also have their capacity. They can develop and become someone who can contribute to the society. Another thing I think I want us to maintain is training for teachers, for the whole system, and investment, because investment was possible during this pandemic. So I think that is, and not only government funded, but also particularly funded. It was very, we are very grateful for the investment, but I think it's something we need to continue. And last but not least, the hygiene and protocols and the security protocols we applied during this pandemic, they must be here to stay.
Thank you for those answers. I have a question based on a statement as well. It was said that the school principal said, give us funds and give us space, and we will make it happen in education.
Yep.
We do know we have a problem with funds, but is space a challenge too? Is the Ministry of Education going to give these principals the space to do what they can do, for which they asked?
I would say everything is possible. And with regards to space, it all comes down back to patience, what Dr. Odette said. We have to provide space to the schools to have the remedial programs applied to the students without forcing them. So that is what they meant with space. They will make it happen. Like I mentioned, the fact that the Group 3, where they took August up to November to remediate the disadvantages the students had. That's what they mean. Give them space to work patiently, take their time, and give the students the skills they need to continue, and without forcing them. And that might mean, Joanne, that laws can and should be adapted, yes.
And is this something that is, I ask why, because as a journalist I've seen over the course of the years that we can all agree on what needs to be done, but in Curaçao it seems as if it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. If I may compare again the session, the economics discussion session yesterday, everybody could agree on what needs to be done. However, Curaçao has an economy that has not been growing for decades. Mm-hmm. It's the same with education. We know what needs to be done, but we know that these laws need to be changed, but it doesn't happen. You made a very interesting remark, Dr. Kleimoedig, Dr. Anders Kleimoedig, about education needs to be depoliticized. What do you mean by that? How is politics affecting the quality of education now? And what is it that needs to change for the right changes to happen?
Okay, let me start by sharing that a lot of power is in the hand of the principals and the school boards. And that power should be used. And what do I mean with that power? Without changing the law, there are interventions principals and school boards can apply to create space. And what do I mean with that? Especially in secondary education, and it also counts for primary education, it is the principal that defines the program. They do have to meet the final terms. They do have to meet the state required levels, but they do have time to reach them. And I think one thing, and that's why I appreciate these kind of settings, because hopefully our principals will listen to it and get tools to work with. They can take time and prepare the kids better. And that is the direct actions they can take without changing laws. When I speak about changing laws, I would say adapting the state required requirements, the state required levels the children should reach, and modernizing them, but with the current law, and they do have space to define what and adapt what they are going to reach within a specific school boards. Of course, it might differ per level, and that's why we do focus on the final exam groups and pre-final exam groups, because their time is more limited than the other levels, but there is space they can provide for themselves, and that's what they need to use. And most of the time, additional funds will help by bringing retired teachers in to work on possible disadvantages, especially in maths, in and Dutch subject and stuff. That might help. But they can make use of the space they already have that the law gives them by adapting the program. And that's what teachers, principals, and school boards do not use enough.
Okay, that's their part. But how about politics now? If you see the budget was 360,
Yep.
240 goes in salary. There's a certain space, I mean, for science and culture as well.
Yep.
So you do have a minister. We know in 10 years we've had many. We've had, I think, more ministers than we've had years transpire. So in which way can you give us, till the point that you can, of course, an insight as to how politics is an obstacle to really develop education to the level we want it to be?
Okay. Budget is defined by the Council of Ministers. So a proposal is made by the Ministry of Finance, but it is the Council of Ministers that decide what the definite budget will be for the País Corso, for the land. So it is important to make the right decisions once there is a proposal on the table. What I experience is that a proposal is there, and the proposal is to cut in education and maybe in health and stuff, and it is approved like that. And I think the discussion must be done on that level and recognized by all ministers of all parties that education is important and that we are not going to cut anymore in the education budget. I think, and that's what that level can make for us.
Why is it so simple for them to always go to that budget to cut? Because we have heard this before. You had during election times. Oh, when I said, even if I'm minister, if I'm in parliament, I won't approve a budget if it cuts into the education budget. But they usually do at the end. So then the question is, why is the education budget the go-to? Why is it seems so easy to cut in the education budget?
I wouldn't know the word exactly. Schaafmethode. Is applied.
Just a little here, a little there.
Exactly, just cutting a little. So it's not specifically education, and I can imagine that the budget provided by the Ministry of Education is prepared using that method by cutting maybe a percentage on certain areas, and that is presented, but it is not evaluated enough. It is not considered, and it is not done based on any research, based on any discussions, and I mean insightful and content related discussion. It is based on needs to create to downsize the budget, and that's it. So the discussion must turn into a content-based discussion from what is needed, what is important, what do we need as a country, and let us make conscious decision on where to cut. And we all ministries are important. All ministries are important because economic development would consider their ministry even more important than education, and that would be also for the Justice Department and also for the Health Department. But what do we consider important as a nation? Because and I do think that if you invest in education, cuts investments in health and in justice will drop gradually. So we have to make a conscious decision there.
Two final questions, one for each of you. Let me start with Vladimir Kleinmoedig.
Yeah.
The pandemic is affecting the economy. An economy is ever changing. Economic pillars are changing. Yesterday, during the economic session, it was stated as well that the people are not skilled for the jobs on the market. So there's a disengagement there. What are we doing to remedy this? Is there something going on? Are there policies in the making? Is someone thinking about this? People come out of the school, and then they go on the market, and then there's no job because they are not skilled for the jobs on the market. So
that's why we installed the Council of Education and Labor Market, where those parties discuss the deficiencies, the differences in regards to what they expect and what is delivered. And that's why we involve the labor market in the revision of the state-required levels of education, and to put the right focus on skills, for instance, skills and attitude. What we receive from the ROA, the council, is that the most important aspect is the attitude of the students when they graduate. So the revision is taking place right now, especially for vocational education, and with a focus on the right attitude and giving the right attitude to the students for when they enter the labor market later. An additional development we are working on is the law of higher education. And in this law, we included also a council on that level, because the current ROA only serves the vocational education, unfortunately. So we are going to develop also another council of education sector and the labor market, especially and dedicated to higher education, to work on that gap too. And I have to say that schools, and in particular schools, do have a lot of interaction with the labor market. And based on that, on their own, with the space they are given, they do adapt their program to serve the labor market better. But it has to be formalized in the law, and with law I mean the state-required levels the students must achieve.
Politics.
So, sorry?
So politics.
Exactly. So that's the way we are working right now in improving those levels, so we can bridge that gap.
Thank you very much. Last question, and maybe this one is, I'm going to ask more as a psychologist. We are living in times of crisis. That's the theme for this year as well, the economic resilience, the sustainable development. In times of crisis, pathway to education. You have teachers that are not motivated now. They feel that they are, again, overworked. They are underpaid. You have students that are disengaged. You have students that feel left behind, lost, parents that don't know how to handle the situation amidst a chaos, maybe economic or financial, at home. What is the best way to go about this, not only as individuals, but more from a policy level? in helping the community heal mentally so that the quality of education at least doesn't get more stuck.
worse.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's very important what I said already is to first accept that we are in a crisis mentally, emotionally, and financially. And if you're in a crisis and you accept that, it's important for the government also to take that all those challenges very serious, more serious than they are doing at this moment, and giving hope, not only providing interventions such as that teachers can go to someone to talk about their frustration, their challenges, and things that they are dealing with at the schools, because I talk to a lot of teachers and they have it very hard and they don't feel appreciated. And that's also a very big problem, that they think we are the one that are not important enough, but they expect a lot of us. So I think if we also change our communication toward the teachers, not only the government, but also the parents, if the parents start realizing that the teachers are doing very hard work and they're going through a lot of things to make the best of it, they will feel more appreciated. That will help also. And I think it's also important that we make more social workers available in order to cope with these problems, because there is a lot of problems in all the schools and also in the families of people that are dealing with a lot of challenges, like losing their job, surviving every day to give their children food on the table. So we have a lot of problems where we are focusing sometimes on things that are not so relevant, with discussions and character assassinations and things like that. I think we have to focus more on making it better, and also very important, create hope, because hope is something that will help you heal. If you have hope, you know it will be over, it will get better. And now a lot of people on Curacao, they don't believe there is hope that it will get better. So I think that's very important. Give hope and also make your actions in alignment with what you are promising, and that they can see it in your actions, that you are really caring and also making decisions that will make Curacao and the situation better.
Thank you very much for your insights. I hope everybody watching is feeling inspired by these words. I think, as was stated, we all have a responsibility in this. If you have kids, if you don't have kids, if you're in politics, if you are in the education field, we all are responsible as a community for our children and our next generation. So very important. Thank you very much to both of you for your inputs and insights. And thank you to you for the questions sent. I want to remind everybody that we do have another session today. This will start at 3 p.m. Curacao time, local time. This discussion will be about the financial impact of COVID-19. As you all know, this is all part of the 21st International Conference on Diversity in Organizations, Communities, and Nations, with the theme this year, Economic Resilience and Sustainable Development in Times of Crisis. So pathway to education and action. So it's very important. It was very important for the University of Curacao hosting this, for the sessions that they would provide to be around the topic of COVID-19 and the impact this has had on the community as a whole from different areas and with different perspectives. So by this time, if you have followed all sessions, we had the social impact discussion, the economic discussion yesterday, and right now we just had the education impact. You can watch these back in the same link from the live stream. They are online, so you can always go back and watch these sessions. Very interesting presentations and data that is being provided on our economic situation, on our financial situation, and very, very interesting insights. So I want to invite you for the financial discussion that's going to take place at 3 p.m. we are going to have a representative of the Ministry of Finance that is going to present interesting information as well as to how the pandemic impacted our island financially. We all know the situation we are in. I don't think that needs another explanation, just as any other country around the world. These are challenging times, but it's important to know what the situation is if you want to remedy it. And we will be also having a very interesting presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on the auditor profession. So this will take place at 3 to 5. You're more than welcome. The number is in the screen once again, where you can send your questions, you can for the sessions, or if you have any other questions about the conference and the link, you can always send us a WhatsApp or go to the Facebook of University of Curaçao. And this information is, of course, for the local participants, because the global participants have their way of accessing these sessions as well. I thank you all. It's Joanne da Costa Gomez on behalf of the University of Curaçao and, of course, of diversity in organizations, communities, and nations. Thank you for your attendance, and we will see each other back here in 3 hours at 3 p.m.
Curaçao has a hot new vibe and is now the place to be. An explosion of art, architecture, and restaurants has spurred redevelopment, transforming Curaçao into one of the hippest destinations in the Caribbean. But the island still radiates its European charm, natural beauty, and wonderful mix of Dutch, Spanish, Caribbean, and African cultures. Visitors must go and feel it for themselves. Located on the outer fringes of the hurricane belt, Curaçao is easy to reach by nonstop flights from 6 North American gateways and by same-day service from 40 cities in the USA and Canada. Still a member of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, daily nonstop flights arrive from Amsterdam, and many flights arrive from South American and Caribbean locations. English is spoken widely, along with Dutch, Spanish, and Papiamentu, the local language. Curaçao's dry, sunny climate and an average temperature of 87 degrees Fahrenheit make it a mecca for every variety of outdoor activities. Visitors won't have to change money. While the official currency is the Netherlands Antillean Guilder, or NAF, US dollars are widely accepted. And the water is safe to drink, straight from a modern desalination plant. Want to know more? Watch our other videos to learn all the things you need to know for planning personalized dream vacations. You'll see where to stay, lounge, dine, and party. You'll get tips on the hottest areas like the Peter Mai district, the best beaches, where to access shore and ocean dives, and all kinds of land and water-based activities, some that are unique to Curaçao. So, welcome to Curaçao and its hot new vibe. Visitors must go and feel it for themselves.